Hello everyone, here we are in the lecture video for this module. The film we're looking at is Mary and Max. It's a very cool little film. I'm excited to show it, and I'm a big fan of the type of animation that they're using in this production. So Mary and Max, directed by a guy named Adam Elliott. He's an Australian stop motion writer, producer, and director. So he's been doing this his whole career. This is what he's into. He definitely considers himself an auteur director, which we've spoken about earlier in the semester. Everything that ends up on screen is his vision, comes from his mind. And when you're working in a format like stop motion animation, it truly is everything coming from his mind, making it to the screen, right? His films have been in over 700 film festivals, and he's won over 100 awards. You can see his list of work over there on the red column there on the slide. So he hasn't made a lot of films. So for him to be in this many film festivals and win this many awards is pretty prestigious. He's won an Academy Award for one of his short films called Harvey Crumpet, which kind of led him to the ability to make a feature film. This one is semi-autobiographical in the fact that you deal with a pen-pal relationship in this film, and he kind of referenced a pen pal that he's had for over 20 years that he continues to write to. So that's kind of where his inspiration came from. Just by looking at the picture up above, you can kind of tell it's a monochromatic color palette with little pops of color, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. It's definitely a bittersweet story, but it definitely is heartwarming once you get to the end and you kind of process it. You can find the warmth in the story that we just watched. So hopefully you enjoy the film as much as I do. The film is a stop motion animated film, so we'll talk a little bit more about stop motion animation as we make our way forward. The budget for the film was $8.3 million, and it had a crew of 120 people that worked on this production. Right, it took them 57 consecutive weeks to film this. One of the things about stop motion animation is it's extremely time consuming. They would spend their 10-hour days, and at the end of the day, you come out of production with maybe 2 to 5 seconds of runtime. So it's pretty painstaking work. My first professional job as a filmmaker in the film industry was as a stop motion animator. So I kind of know the pain that goes into, and I don't mean pain in like a bad way, but just the attention to detail and the just the focus that you have to keep under just to produce this kind of work. Okay. It's based on a pen pal that Elliot has been writing to for over 20 years, so it's kind of interesting. And all his work is kind of sort of semi-autobiographical. He's always referencing things from his life that make it into his film. So if you watch his work, again, it's very personal work for him. So again, we've talked about animation in the past. We've looked at films that were animated. We looked at Akira back in, I can't remember if it was week 9, I believe, and that's a anime film, so it's all animation as well. This is a little bit different style of animation, but basically animation works the same way as live action works in terms of the story arc and kind of the production, how you go about the process, but there are definitely some major differences. And this film has a traditional story arc, which you'll see, and what changes in the production, well, that's how the film is shot, right? It is filmed frame by frame, one shot at a time, and we've kind of, again, we talked a little bit about that with Akira. So that part of the process is different than in a live action production. But it definitely retains many of the cinematic storytelling processes that we've been studying, right? So you can still examine all the same stuff. It has directing, it has cinematography, it has sound design, it has acting performance, it has editing, it has all those things that we've been looking at. So we can definitely look at it and evaluate it, and they're still using the same cinematic language that we've been studying all semester. This is a couple still shots from the production of the movie. Okay. So again, remember, I think I said it was 57 weeks it took them to shoot this film. They built, I think it was something like, 133 sets for this production. There was over 200 puppets that had to be constructed and built for this production, and something like 475 props that needed to be made to make this production happen. And one of those props that you'll see a lot of use of is this Underwood typewriter. That is a working typewriter that's a miniature version, and it took them 9 weeks to design it and construct it so that it would work. So again, that gives you just a little bit of a hint of the kind of detail that went into this production and what it takes to do this kind of work. You can see the sets are miniature, but again, there's a lot of detail that goes into it. So the narrative for Mary and Max, let's talk about that. It uses the medium of stop motion animation to tell the story. So it tells a story the same way we're used to seeing a story get played out. It does have one little unique difference that's unique to the film we're watching, other than the stop motion animation. So we'll talk about that. But it uses this style of filmmaking to tell the story, and it actually deals with some pretty tough topics, but because we're watching it in an animated format, it just seems a little bit more palatable and, again, a little bit more heartwarming. So let's kind of pay attention for that and kind of read how you're taking in the information. It's about two people who are struggling to find their place in the world, and they miraculously find each other as pen pals, okay? There's definitely a huge age gap between the two characters, and that would be, I think, a little bit kind of creepy or odd if we were watching it in live action. But because it's stop motion, I think it helps make that seem a little less creepy. And it really isn't. It's a very heartwarming story, and the relationship is just about being friends, but it is a little bit unique in that way. It's a pretty simple story, but again, the fact that it's done in stop motion is what makes it kind of unique. So again, bittersweet story. I know I keep saying that, but it is kind of unique. I've seen many, many animated films. Again, I worked in stop motion animation for a while, and so I was very into this art form. But this story is a film that kind of, again, deals with topics that were a little bit different than what I'm used to seeing when I watch stop motion animated stuff. It's a very unconventional friendship, but it does never feel inappropriate, partly because of the fact that they're using stop motion, which I spoke about. The themes that we address in this movie are things like childhood neglect and bullying and alcoholism, suicide, obesity, autism, mental illness. So again, those aren't topics that you would normally find in a stop motion animated film. We also look at some other stuff that's a little bit more upbeat, right? We look at friendship and recovery, and we look at self-love and acceptance, like accepting yourself for who you are and just trying to find your way and make your way in the world and being okay with you, right? So that's a great lesson to learn, right? So we do see some upbeat kind of themes, but it takes a little while to kind of just work through that and get to the point where we're dealing with self-love and acceptance, okay? So that's why I keep talking about it that way. Mary is definitely our protagonist, and you'll kind of see that as you make your way through the film. It is almost like we have two protagonists, Mary and Max, because we do spend a lot of time looking at both of them and following both of their stories and looking at both of their journeys. But definitely Mary is our protagonist. There are two character arcs that we follow, and we do look at both their journeys as we make the way through the film. So that's kind of unique. The other thing, too, which I want to hit real quick before I get into the process, is the majority of the film is told in narrative. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but that goes to the narrative story. It's and what I mean by that is it's mostly narration as opposed to dialogue. So we'll, again, talk more about that. So the process, right? Everything is designed and created in pre-production. So all the sets are built and constructed, all the puppets are designed, built, and constructed, all those props built, designed, constructed. So the pre-production process is really long. It takes a long time to get ready to make a movie like this, so that way when you get to production, you're ready to go and you have everything. Again, 212 puppets made. Some of that is duplicate puppets. So like Mary, they probably had 10 or 15 versions of Mary, so that when it got a little bit overused and they were manipulating the puppet, they had another one that they could go to. Same with Max. Also, certain puppets are made to do very specific actions, like maybe certain puppets are made so that they could be sitting, and then they had upper body movement, but not really much lower. And then there was characters that were made specifically to walk, and so they had full body range of movement. So a little bit different in that regard. The dialogue is pre-recorded, which was also the case for Akira. And again, the attention to detail you're going to see everywhere in the frame, especially just looking at that Underwood typewriter and the fact that it was a working typewriter that could type out stuff, right? That's pretty insane. Again, the differences were the miniature sets and the stop motion puppets. That's the difference from live action photography. And that's kind of the difference in the whole process. You see, I have a puppet right here. I actually have an armature. This is the interior of these puppets and what it would look like. And I think we talk about that here. I'm going to get to the slide. This is just a little slide that just shows you kind of the production design and the elements that you find in the image and the attention to detail that you can see in each of these images. I mean, Mary's wearing a ring. She's got a pretty detailed cupcake. Look at that little box that's in front of her. It's got some stamps on it. It's got a letter. Look at his apartment down below. There's the typewriter right there as well. So again, a lot of detail goes into each one of these frames. It's very stylized production, and it looks fantastic. Okay, so the film is created one frame at a time, which again we talked about back in Akira. But this one is we're manipulating actual inanimate objects as opposed to drawing them out, right? We're creating it one frame at a time for the whole entire movie. And it's 24 frames in 1 second of runtime. Again, I can't remember if we addressed that in Akira, but that's how it works, right? So there are 24 individual pictures in every 1 second of runtime. So if we do the math, this is a 90-minute film. So 90-minute film times 60 seconds equals 5,400 seconds in this film. And then if we take that down a little bit more, 5,400 seconds in the film multiplied by the 24 frames that are in each second, that equals 129,600 frames. So 129,600 moves multiplied to however many characters are even moving within a scene in each particular shot. That's how many frames they had to create and generate, one move at a time, right? So it is literally the animators going in, making a move, stepping back, taking a picture, and then making a move, and then stepping back and taking a picture. And again, making a move, stepping back, and taking a picture. So those moves might even been a little probably too big of a move to actually make. And this one, you can see it's got a little post that comes off the back of it and goes down, and there's a little stand. Most of the characters would have stands like that so that they wouldn't fall over, and then that has to be digitally removed later when they get to post-production. Now, most of this project isn't done one frame at a time, so I do have to give you a little insight into that. Usually they do what's called shooting on twos, which means every time they take one photo, they're actually taking two photos, which means the number of frames that actually has to be produced is a lot lower, right? So that's more like 70, 80,000 frames, which is still a whole bunch of work, right? Still a lot of work going into it. So real quick, before we get into cinematography, this most recent summer, I was able to teach a stop motion animated class. I've been lucky enough to be able to teach animation for several years. And I wanted to show you a little walk cycle that I did. This little puppet right here is the puppet that I used. This is kind of a mid-range armature, right? It's a few $100s for this whole armature setup. You can actually make them DIY out of just what's called armature wire and plumber's putty. And those are really inexpensive, and you can make stop motion animated movies that way. This one's a little bit mid-range. Those professional ones that you're seeing in the puppets that these people are using are actually custom made for each character. And so those will range into the thousands of dollars for each individual skeleton that goes inside each one of those puppets. And while I was doing that little camp, I was able to do a little walk cycle with this armature. So I wanted to show you that so you can kind of see what the process looks like in its raw form. This doesn't have a set or anything, but you'll actually see the stand that's holding it up, and I would have to digitally remove that if I wanted it to look like the puppet was just standing there. So let's check that out and we'll come right back. Okay, here we are back again. Hopefully you thought that was cool, and it's kind of interesting to kind of see how the process works a little bit. Cinematography. The framing, the lighting, the camera movement, it's all the same language that we've been studying all through this whole class, right? Nothing's different. We're still using the same shots. We're still using lighting. We're still using production design, acting, all that good stuff. We're still using that even though we're telling the story in a little bit different way. These visual techniques provide the basis for the language of cinema, and animation is just kind of copying it because it's something that we understand and we kind of know what we're looking at when we see it, okay? One thing that's really impressive about the cinematography in this movie is the camera movement. Very, very advanced, elaborate camera moves that were done in this particular film. They're fantastic, okay? One of the ways that they do this, or the way that they do this, is they actually use a motion-controlled camera system. So motion control camera system is a computer-controlled camera that can replicate and duplicate and measure out moves, and the computer's just executing those moves, very small movements at a time. Right? And it could actually repeat the move. So if the shot got messed up for some reason, a puppet fell over or whatever, you could back it up and the camera will actually continue and go back and start at the beginning and just repeat that exact same move as many times as you need to, right? And you have to do the animation of the puppets. So it's very, very detailed work. Again, it's called motion controlled camera system. And that was pretty unique. The lighting is pretty good in this film too. It's actually really dramatic at times. It's some contrasty lighting at certain times. It's not just a flat bright light, high key lighting scenario. It's very contrasty and has some low key moments. So the lighting is very detailed and very cinematic in this particular movie, and the shot angles that they choose are very well done. Acting, again, a little bit different. We talked a little bit about this, I believe, in Akira, but all the audio is pre-recorded, and the actors are giving their performance knowing that they're not going to be the one on screen actually giving the performance, the physical performance, right? And there were some big stars of people who were in this movie, right? The narrator was Barry Humphries. The adult version of Mary was Toni Collette, who's an Academy Award nominated actor. Bethany Whitmore plays young Mary. They actually did a huge search to find the person they wanted to play little young Mary. I think they looked at 40 or 50 or 60 different little kids until they finally settled on her. And not settled, but decided to select her. She does a great job. Philip Seymour Hoffman, Academy Award winning actor, was in there. And then Damien is a guy named Eric Bana, who's also a very established actor that does a great job. So very big cast. They provide the performance in the voice, and then it's the animator's job to kind of bring that out in the physicality of the characters and kind of get it on screen. So that's kind of how this process works, but the actors do have to do a lot of work in pre-recording. And again, most of this film was actually done in narration. So Barry Humphries has a huge role in this movie. It isn't driven by the dialogue of the characters. There's very little dialogue. It's really driven by the narration of Barry Humphries kind of guiding us through the story. So that's a little bit unique in the way that this story is being told. It's not very dialogue driven, which is different than a lot of the films that we've seen in the past. Okay? Again, heavy on the narration, very little dialogue, okay? The editing, it's the same as live action feature films, except there's no multiple takes, right? They're not animating extra material. They're only animating exactly what they need because it's such a painstaking process, and all of that gets decided in pre-production. So the editor isn't looking through multiple takes. He's kind of, or she's kind of assembling the project as it comes in and just kind of cutting out the little bit that we need and then putting it in. There's a little bit of extra on both ends probably, and maybe to capture the timing a little bit. They're chopping a little here, a little there, but it's a little bit different process in that regard, right? The storytelling's being done in the animation, and the editor really can't massage much of that because there's very little extra material. Okay, and when the cut is kind of decided in pre-production, which I just mentioned. When they figure out the story, when they do storyboards, they're kind of figuring out how long they want this shot to be on screen, so that way the animators animate it for that length, as opposed to it being decided in post-production. Okay. Mary and Max, the cinematic terms for this week, things you have to think about. We talked about stop motion animation and what it is. It's really like puppet animation. There's actually a few forms of it if you look at the definitions and cinematic terms on the film page, or the lecture page. I think you'll see the definition for stop motion and the different types there are. There's paper cutout, there's object animation, there's puppet animation, there is claymation. Frames per second, or FPS. FPS is film lingo for frames per second, and that really defines how the playback of a project is going to look. And the cinematic standard is 24 frames per second. So 24 frames per second really gives us the image blur and illusion of motion that we like to see in a movie theater. When you're watching television, a lot of news and stuff like that, that's shot at 30 frames per second. There are things that are done at 60 frames per second and beyond. So there's not just 24 isn't the only option when you're looking at that. And then narration. So what's narration compared to the dialogue, right? So somebody kind of guiding us and telling us the story as we see it revealed on screen. And when we're talking about animation, something to always remember, it doesn't matter what the format of animation you're looking at, absolute control by the director, because they control every single thing. Even in feature films, when the director has a location that's picked, maybe they're on a real location and they don't have the budget to just remove skyline or put different things in place digitally. So sometimes they just have to deal with what's there and get the best shot they can. But when you're talking about animation, everything that's making it on the frame is 100% what the director wanted. So that's something to think about as you look at stop motion animation. So hope you enjoyed the film. Fantastic film. I'm interested to hear what you guys talk about in the discussion board, because it's always great stuff. Keep up the good work. We're almost done here. Next week, week 16, we are looking at the final week, and we have a good film for you then too as well. Take care.